Base Case 040, John Cage Part 4, the last of the series. Last of John Cage's 10 Rules for Students and Teachers. It's so useful to have great music minds giving advice. We don't get enough of that. And I mentioned last week that Thelonious Monk, the great jazz pianist, did something similar as far as giving rules. And it was transcribed by the saxophonist Steve Lacy, and you'll find it on the internet. It's a real thing. And I'm still dealing with that too, thinking about it, talking to my students and other players about it, talking to other teachers about it, and, both Monk's and Cage's advice to us. This is the stuff that you won't get in their bio. It's not the stuff that you're going to get in a book. It's something that they wrote and they felt strongly about. And you think about the truth behind something like Cage's advice. Like I said, it's not like reading a bio. Those books don't always give us what we need. We see how they grew up and everything, but this is their words coming to us, literally from the grave. And it's more like a conversation, and being that it's so terse, it's really terse, each one is a sentence or two long, that you have to think about it and talk with other people about it. It's not enough to have something like this hanging on your wall, or to read it once or twice, or read it from time to time and, mention that you have read it. I've got to look at these things over and over again. The Monk's rules or his advice is stuck to my practice folder, and I look at that constantly, and I tell my students about it. And this can be impactful and continue to be impactful, but you must deal with it, usually through conversation. Reading it once, like I said, is just not going to do anything. And that's what I'm trying to promote here. Last year at this time, I did some episodes on the 3 books that form some basis of my teaching philosophy and approaches to performance practice. The idea being that as a teacher, at the end of the school year, I have some time to think about what I'm doing, and the same for my students at the end of the season, right? It's almost like a post-mortem, what went right, what went wrong, what am I missing from my playing, what am I missing from my writing, what am I missing from my teaching, what am I missing from my podcast? And more so, I'm not doing a lot of teaching for the summer, so I have time to think about my approach and philosophy, totally renewing, right? Total renewal, refreshing. And it's the same for you. Even if you're not a student or a teacher, you must take time out to think and break away from the grind of studying, practicing, and playing. And I see players that are doing that. They practice and play, and there's no stop. And even if you're not at the end of a semester or a series of gigs, take some time out to evaluate what you're doing as a musician. You need to. You might be, it's a good chance you're not doing some things right. I've done that in the past in different ways other than at the end of the semester. I've left bands and left regular gigs. If something's not working for you as a musician and person, you've got to figure it out. It's like a relationship, you and music, and you've got to take care of it. Okay, so now to finish Cage. This one's at the top, rule number 1. Find a place you trust and then try trusting it for a while. His words, it could be a band, a job, a teacher, a school. There's more to that, though. What does Cage mean by trusting it for a while? I've thought about this a lot. Trusting something for a while means a few things, but I'm going to apply it to a band or a gig or a teacher/music school. And for me, trust it for a while means putting yourself into it, giving it a lot. If you've got a teacher that you're trusting, you've got to give a lot back. You give back by practicing more. You give back in respect for their time. You give back in taking them at their word and following their instruction on their instrument. You get more back that way. Both parties benefit that way. I can speak from that personally as a teacher, and my students that practice a lot and have a lot and put a lot into it, it just goes so much better. And that includes bands and gigs. If you find a band you like playing and everything's working out, then do something about it. Do something to improve the situation. Do something to improve the gig. I've been on some gigs before and brought something to it. This leads to rule number 2. General duties as a student. Pull everything out of your teacher and pull everything out of your fellow students. Now, I see this a lot teaching at a school. And I see both ends of it. I've had some players that showed up for some rehearsals, did some things, but didn't have a lot of commitment to the ensemble they were in, didn't have a lot of commitment to the class that they were in. Did they get a lot out of it? I can't imagine that they got all they could have gotten out of it. Students would ask them to join them in sectionals or outside rehearsals or joining them at jam sessions, and there was just no response or interest. I'm sure they got something out of the rehearsals and the shows, but not all that they could have. And it's a sad fact, and I've seen it. You know, and being a musician is just like everything else. You've got to really commit to it. You've got to put a full commitment into it. And it's not just in music. What you put into something is what you're going to get the most out of it in most cases. The payoff can be huge, too. You know, ask questions, both of other students and of your teachers. They have answers. And I'm on the hook, too, because rule number 3, general duty as a teacher, pull everything out of your student. It's easier with some students than others, but I have to challenge my players. I'll call them out sometimes when I hear the same line not being played correctly repeatedly. I ask them questions about a piece of music that furthers the conversation or hopefully makes them think about what they know and what they should be knowing. You know, I'll connect something in my rehearsal or lesson to a techniques class they're taking. You know, if they're playing something, I'll connect it to the music theory class that they're in. It's important for me to do this but it's even more important to my students to get them to think and to challenge them in a non-confrontational way. You know, sometimes that word challenge becomes sort of, it's got a pejorative sense to it, you know, kind of aggressive, and I don't do it that way. To me, that's important. I'm not trying to lay down the law here. I think encouragement is the best way to get a player moving in the right direction. I don't think that fear is a great long-term motivator. It has its moments, but it's damaging for the most part. And there's a law of diminishing returns that comes into play. Some ensemble director, private lesson teacher that's on you every week, after a while, you're not going to be afraid of it anymore. You know, so personally, I stay away from that. Encouraging. Here's some universal encouragement for everybody listening. There's something good happening in your playing. There's something good happening in everyone's playing. You don't think you're playing well? There's still something good happening in there, and you've got to work from there. That's my rule in my studio and my rehearsals. You've got enough to work with. I say that again and again in my rehearsals. We've got enough to work with. You've got a starting point. Now, I'm digressing into my own philosophies, but that's what good advice, like Cage's advice and Monk's advice, will do. It'll make you think about what I'm doing. It'll think what you're doing. Now, enough of me. Here's the last 3 of his helpful hints. These 3 really spoke to me when I read this the first time. One of these, read everything you can get your hands on. I do this a lot. It's good. The committed musicians that I know all have at least one common trait. And the big one, they're really knowledgeable. I mean, they're very knowledgeable about a lot of things. And we don't just talk about music. You know, we'll talk about literature, movies, art, and non-fine arts things too. That's not a coincidence that they play well and can speak intelligently on many subjects. If for anything, we have to have something in our life to be interested in besides music and bass playing. It can't be all music all the time. And this is helpful to be a musician. You know, listen to my episodes on effortless mastery that I did last year with Kenny Werder saying as much. Another one of Cage's helpful hints, look at movies carefully and often. I mean, look at movies. I mean, really look and listen. For the reasons listed above and more, music plays a role in movies. You think about all of the arts, visual arts, theater outside of musicals, right? You're not going to hear it. Music doesn't come into play like the way it congeals with film and music together. Watch your favorite film and listen to how music set things up. You know, it might be a cue. You know, it might be some underlying music that heightens the emotions of the scene, you know, some underscoring. It might help describe a character. I mean, how many film soundtracks have a character's name theme? You know, Jack's theme from Fabulous Baker Boys, you know, movie about musicians, right? The love theme from Spartacus, you know, Alex North wrote that. Marvin Hamlish's first movie, The Swimmer, with Burt Lancaster. The main theme written by Hamlish, Send for Me in Summer, lays the basis for the whole film, and it bookends it. It speaks to the plot of the film. I've thought about that film and the music for it for hours since I saw it as a kid. There was a great art historian, David Rosen. He taught at Columbia for years. And he theorized, and I'm in total agreement with him when I read this in his obituary, he theorized that all art coexisted on one single plane. And that made it into his obituary in the New York Times. Movies, books, visual art, dance, all existing in one place with music. Cage is insisting that we think about that and live that. You can email me at phil@basecase.co. I'll talk to you soon.